There's lots to talk about a running back right now, but one guy might have made me change my mind on him while I was preparing for this show. Did he just load up on a doughy matchup and he's about to faceplant? Or did he just get a shot to show he's actually good enough to help our fantasy teams? We'll discuss that guy, plus plenty more running backs and a volatile receiver on an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to sort through some key situations and usage trends to help you make your Week 7 lineup decisions and maybe even some moves that can help your roster beyond that. Jared, let's start with a Giants offense that lit up Thursday Night Football a week ago from the day that we're actually recording this. Jackson Dart, of course, was one of those key players in that one. Even if you like him, though, the rest of the way, this looks like a pretty easy week to sit him against the Broncos. Broncos defense that's been really tough, including against the Jets, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But I think the more interesting question right now, and maybe it's not even a question right now, but we'll get into that, is Cam Skattebo. I mean, what have we seen with his usage so far?
Yeah, we last week was like the first time since Skattebo had emerged that we saw him with Tyrone Tracy back in there. And really, Skattebo's role did not change much with Tracy back. He played 72% of the Giants' offensive snaps. That was actually Skattebo's second highest mark of the season. He got 19 of the 26 running back carries. He did lose some of the passing down snaps to Tyrone Tracy. Skattebo's route rate dropped from like the low 60s to 46% in that game. That hurts a little bit, but Skattebo remained the clear goal line back. He obviously scored the 3 rushing touchdowns. So to me, Skattebo, the role is good enough where you just start him every week as an RB2. I think you're not going to get any more 3 touchdown games, and touchdowns are going to remain a concern for him probably just because this Giants team every week is near the bottom of the league in terms of implied points. But the usage is good enough where I don't think you have to really think about whether you're starting Skattebo every week at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see exactly how this Giants offense is going to perform. It's understandable for everybody's projections to start that low, but it's possible, at least with the talent influx that they have recently gotten with Skattebo and Jackson Dart, that it's a better offense than we were expecting. So this will be a good test against Denver. I'm not expecting big numbers, but he's been very good. And like you said, he's getting usage in both areas. We'll see where that receiving usage settles in. Tyrone Tracy was a wide receiver in college before switching to running back. So that has always made sense as an area where he would get time, but he also didn't perform especially well as a receiver, as a rookie. Cam Skattebo was a very good receiving back in college. So, we'll see. Ultimately, we just put our trade targets article out for Week 7. Cam Skattebo was one of the names that was tossed out as a possibility for that one. And actually, Jared, you were the one who nominated him. So is he somebody that you're looking to sell right now, or is he just kind of a name to consider selling?
I think Shane nominated him, and I kind of said, yeah, I had been thinking about him as a sell. But I mean, anyone coming off a 3 touchdown game, I think you can make a case to sell. I think a 3 touchdown game on the Giants is an even stronger sell case. Again, to me, I'm viewing Skattebo as a weekly RB2. If you can get an RB1 level of return for him, I would consider selling him at that cost because I don't think he's going to have this type of upside going forward. The other thing about the receiving production is, scrambling quarterbacks and running quarterbacks like Jackson Dart, they don't check down as often as, pocket passers. And I think we're probably going to start to see that where Skattebo's targets are going to not be as strong as they had been from Russell Wilson.
But they do tend to create running space for their running backs as well. So can balance out. One of the things that I always try to balance in writing the trade targets article is not making every single guy that we mention as a sell just seem like a player that we're saying sell him now because his value is about to tank. That's certainly not the category I would put Cam Skattebo in. I think he's the kind of player that if you are one of those few teams that's in good shape at running back, you got 3 or 4 guys that you want to start every week, and you're looking to sell one of those players to add value elsewhere, get a prime receiver, something like that, then I agree. Cam Skattebo can be a guy that you go ahead and sell in that vein to improve another position, to help out your roster overall, not because he, just had this outlandish game and he's about to crash.
Yeah, the value is definitely not going to tank. To me, it's the value might be at its peak right now, which would be the reason to consider trading him.
I would probably hold on to him in most cases on my roster for now. I do think that there's a chance he could become a sell candidate around week 11. That's when the Giants get Green Bay. That's the first of 4 straight negative matchups, according to our strength of schedule page. And within that range of 4 matchups is also the Giants' week 14 bye, which is a poorly timed bye for teams trying to make and then advance in the playoffs. So, depending on when trade deadlines are, that might be a time where we revisit Cam Skattebo as a sell candidate.
Yeah, good time to start looking at that strength of schedule page, which, by the way, you can now use sliders to look at any range of weeks you want. So if you want to see who has the best, schedules down the stretch or even in your fantasy playoffs, you can easily do that.
Yeah, not only changes the range of weeks that you're looking at, but automatically reshuffles the ordering based on whose schedules are better or worse for that range that you're now viewing. So very usable page and definitely helpful the further we get into the fantasy season. A guy who was helpful for the first time all season last week, Jared, was Kimani Vidal for the Chargers. Of course, had a huge game against the Dolphins because that's what you do as a running back against the Dolphins right now. A tougher matchup with the Colts this week, but it's not a truly tough matchup. 21st in run defense DVOA. So it's a tougher spot just because it couldn't possibly not be a tougher spot. What are we doing with Kimani Vidal this week?
Yeah, I think you're starting him in most cases, right? I mean, he's inside the top 25 in our week 7 running back rankings. I just like this game in general, this Colts Chargers game, 48.5 point over under. Chargers are 2.5 point favorites, 25 point implied total. I think there's going to be a lot of points in this game. And if breaking ties lean towards guys in this game, it's definitely not the Dolphins matchup. The Colts are, like you said, Matt, 21st in run defense DVOA. They're 11th in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. But I do think Vidal is the best bet to control the backfield in this game. It's not a guarantee. That's why he doesn't sit like a bit higher. I think if we could project him to play the role he did last week, he'd be inside the top 20, maybe up to, into the 15 to 18 type range. But I think that keeps his floor a bit lower. But again, the upside is here in this offense. I think it should be a high scoring game. And he did look good last week. He clearly looked like the Chargers' best running back in that game.
Yeah, we can't say for sure that he holds exactly that work share that he got last week every week going forward because it's one game. So, we have to put that as a caveat. He was the first guy in for the Chargers at running back, though. He did handle 7 of the first 9 carries. Part of that was Haskins' drive in between the 2 Vidal drives was a short one. Of course, part of that was Vidal being the better player in that game than Hassan Haskins. So like you said, we should bet on Vidal leading the work in this game. That's certainly how we have them projected. We want to make sure not to overrate him, but I do also think that there's a chance that he's better than, I don't know, how we want to react to how it was last week. I know that I came away from that game against the Dolphins saying, oh, all right, well, it's cool that he got the work, but let's not put too much stock into the yardage because it's the Dolphins. They just gave up 200 yards to Rico Dowdle before that. Then I looked a little bit further, and Vidal was second on the week in rush yards over expected per carry. Among all qualifying running backs last week, trailed only Bijan Robinson, and the rate that he put up in that category was the 9th best number for any individual running back game this season among guys who got 10 plus carries. So he did perform well. We do on the other side have Shane doing the film review on the site this week saying, hold on a second. There are spots here where he wouldn't have gotten as much yardage if he was playing against a much better defense, which he's going to be most weeks.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the other advanced metrics were just fine for Vidal last week. Yards after contact per attempt, PFF rushing grade. He was fine in those metrics. Again, did beat Haskins in those, which I think is the most important thing. Like the fact that he just outplayed Haskins in basically any metric you want to look at. That's what, again, makes him a good bet to get most of the work this week. And I don't expect him to be anywhere near as efficient as he was against Miami. I think that was mostly due to the matchup. The Chargers still dealing with a ton of injuries on this offensive line. I still think it's going to be a pass-leaning offense, especially in this matchup against the Colts, who are dealing with a ton of injuries in their secondary. So that's why Vidal doesn't sit higher than he is. But again, I think for a lot of teams, he's going to make sense as a starter this week.
Mm-hmm. Another team that helped us at running back more than we probably expected heading into week 6 was the Chicago Bears, who before their bye had a run game that was not doing a whole lot. And Coach Ben Johnson even said, I don't think it's just Swift. I think it's some him. It's some how the quarterback's playing. It's some of the blocking. Everybody needs to do better to make this run game work. So they came back from the bye and it worked quite a bit better. It gave us big yardage from DeAndre Swift, one of the bigger running back performances so far this season. So is that just is it an example of Ben Johnson taking the bye week to fix the run game, and now we should trust DeAndre Swift going forward, or should we do something else with this?
I mean, I'm more optimistic about the run game. I think Ben Johnson does have a lot to do with that. I still think he's one of the best play callers in the NFL. In the bye week, I'm sure he kind of looked at what had been going wrong and fixed some of it. They also made some changes on the O-line. They got their right tackle, Darnell Wright, back for that game. They actually made a move at left tackle, Theo Benedette, in for Braxton Jones. I didn't study the tape to know if that made a big difference, but it might have. And that, by the way, is a good Washington run defense too. So it was an impressive and surprising showing for me from that Bears running game. The funny thing with DeAndre Swift, though, is his role actually got worse last week coming out of the bye than it had been. We saw Kyle Monangai play a bit more. Roschon Johnson actually got his first carry of the season, did not play a lot. He's still basically a non-factor, but Swift's 59% snap rate in that game was actually his second lowest of the season. Now, he still got 14 of the 20 running back carries, got the 3 targets on a 10% target share. So it was still a good role overall, but and I'm going to at least, we're going to monitor this backfield, but I think Swift's performance in that one might, get him some of that work back going forward, because Monangai was fine, but Swift was clearly the better runner in that game. So we'll keep an eye on that. It's another pretty good spot for Chicago this week in that they're 5-point home favorites, nice implied total. The Saints have been pretty good against the run this season. They're 7th in our run defense power rankings and 9th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. But again, I think Swift's kind of the same case as Vidal, where he's going to get enough work, even if the efficiency isn't amazing, that I think he belongs in starting lineups.
If I have DeAndre Swift, I feel better about him right now, but I'm also looking to sell him, and I would be more interested in selling him than I would be in selling Cam Skattebo. DeAndre Swift currently sits 14th in PPR points per game. He finished 23rd in that category last year, 24th for the Eagles the year before, 17th in 2022 in Detroit. So clearly higher than he's been for most of his career. He has one other season where he finished higher than that. It was just his second 100-yard rushing game since joining the Bears at the beginning of last season. 5th time in 22 games with the Bears where DeAndre Swift hit 5.0 yards per rush. So basically, he's a much better bet to not be nearly as efficient going forward as he was in that game against Washington. Carries per game, as you mentioned, not only was his role down for this game, but his carries per game are down versus where he was either of the past 2 years, his Philly season and his first season in Chicago. His receptions per game are also lower than for any of his Detroit seasons, just 3 receptions per game. So all of that's okay. And if I am just holding Swift the rest of the way, he's probably going to be okay. But I don't think he's going to be a whole lot better than okay based on the history that we have with him. So again, he's somebody that I would look to sell this week to try to upgrade.
Yeah, we do there. We have a long sample size of Swift being pretty underwhelming as a runner. And I don't think the target volume is going to rebound too much just because the Bears have so many other weapons there.
And within that long sample, we have spots where he flashes, where you're like, oh, DeAndre Swift is good. I forgot. And then he's like, oh, yeah, but I forgot. I'm actually not that good.
Exactly.
Isiah Pacheco has not given us the big numbers we're talking about for Kimani Vidal or DeAndre Swift yet, but there seems like some reason to believe that more fantasy help could be coming, right?
Yeah, for sure. It hasn't shown up in the box score yet, but Pacheco's role is really trending up. He's kind of emerged as the clear lead back there over Kareem Hunt. Pacheco has set season highs in both snap rate and route rate in each of the last 2 weeks. So 77% of the snaps last week, 76% of the routes. So, kind of at this point in like a feature role. And the one thing that Hunt had been doing prior to last week was getting almost all the work near the goal line. That changed last week. We saw Isiah Pacheco didn't score a touchdown, but he was on the field for all 3 of the Chiefs snaps inside the 5-yard line. So we might start to see some of the touchdowns come Pacheco's way too. This is still a Chiefs offense that I think getting Rashee Rice back this week, they're going to remain one of the pass heaviest offenses. So you're not going to get probably big carry totals out of Isiah Pacheco, but I just think this offense is going to be very good. Pacheco's efficiencies should improve. He to me looks better too these last few weeks than he did early on in the season, just like, I guess, running a bit less hesitant than he was early on. Maybe that was still, coming off the injury, whatever it was. So he looks better. The offense is going to be really good. I think you could get like nice efficiency and touchdown production from Pacheco the rest of the way. And I would imagine he's pretty cheap to acquire in a trade right now because, again, he still hasn't really delivered the fantasy points.
He hasn't scored a rushing touchdown yet, which is a big help in keeping that value down. OC Matt Nagy said last week after the Jaguars game that they all had talked to Isiah Pacheco about not putting too much pressure on himself and just being himself and letting loose a little bit on the field. And then we heard Monday night, if you watched that Chiefs game against the Lions, or Sunday night, I'm sorry, you heard the crew say that Chiefs coaches talked about wanting to get him the ball more. So we are seeing that. It hasn't been big enough yet where Pacheco has made the fantasy splash. So I agree. He should be easy to acquire right now. And that's key, because if you're paying less to get him, he doesn't necessarily need to start for you in week 7, although you might want to against the Raiders. If you wait until there is an actually good game, that price is almost certainly going to go up. And, not only is Pacheco starting to look better, getting involved more, but the offense has been better. It's been better over the past 3 weeks versus where it was the first 3 weeks. It's already top 9 in scoring and total yards, and now it gets Rashee Rice back. That offense has already helped Pacheco to not see stacked boxes when he's running. Among 41 qualifying running backs, he has seen the 5th lowest rate of stacked boxes. That's when you have 8 defenders or more, inside the tackle box, close to the line of scrimmage. Obviously, the fewer guys that you have in that area, the more room there is for a running back to get going and potentially gain more yardage. So, all of it kind of lines up to say Isiah Pacheco hasn't done much for us so far, but he certainly could do so over the second half of the season.
Yeah, and we've seen him have stretches where he's been, top 15 fantasy running back, despite the Chiefs being a pass-heavy offense. So I think he's one of the best buys in fantasy football right now.
The Panthers' backfield gave us way more than anybody should have reasonably expected over the past 2 weeks, with Rico Dowdle running like Jim Brown in those 2 games. But now we got Chuba Hubbard back at practice as of Wednesday. So what do we do, Jared?
I'm just excited to finally get an answer to this question, like what this backfield's going to look like when Chuba's back. And I don't think Chuba's a lock to return yet. This was a setback from a previous calf injury. I think they're going to want to be cautious with him. Like you said, Matt, he was just limited on Wednesday. So we'll see. I mean, as of now, we still have Chuba projected to miss this game. So you're going to find Dowdle way up in our running back rankings. We'll see what the projections look like if Chuba comes back. I think we'd be projecting Dowdle to lead this backfield. And, whether it's a 60-40 split or a 65-35 split, he's just been, he's been too good for them to go away from, at least off the hop, right? Like there's a chance where Hubbard outplays Rico Dowdle this week or the following week and things start to shift again. But I even if Chuba Hubbard's back this week, I think Dowdle will belong in most fantasy lineups. I don't think he'd drop outside the top 20 running backs in our rankings.
I agree. Chuba Hubbard limited to begin the practice week. We can assume that he won't be 100% healthy by the game if he is playing in that one. So there's just no reason for Carolina to be like, all right, Rico, that was fun. Now go sit down so we can give Chuba Hubbard the ball 15 times. They should bring him back slowly. They should let Dowdle lead the backfield. We should get, at least some reports, if we don't hear directly from Dave Canales, about what the plan is going to be for that game. On the other hand, he has no reason to reveal it outside of the game. So we have to go on assumptions to some degree, unless we do hear explicitly. But I think, too, once we get a fully healthy Chuba Hubbard, we're probably going to see a more split backfield than what we got early this season. Carolina clearly didn't think that Rico Dowdle was as good as what he gave the past 2 weeks. Otherwise, they would have given him the ball more early in the season. I think it's going to make both of these guys frustrating once we do have a healthy Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, definitely a potential sell on Rico Dowdle right now. It really depends what his trade value is, right? I think everyone knows Hubbard's coming back at some points. It really depends on if you can find an owner in your league that, thinks Rico's still going to be a top 15 running back the rest of the way. I think he's potentially sellable, because I don't think he's probably going to return that type of value. This is still Carolina. It's not a great running game. These last 2 games came against Miami and Dallas, who are not only the 2 worst run defenses in the league this year, but like 2 of the worst run defenses we've seen in a long time. So it's just a perfect setup for Rico Dowdle. And again, I still think he's going to be useful and startable in fantasy going forward, even when Hubbard's back. But I think you're talking more like a low end RB2, maybe even RB3, depending on how this work ends up getting split.
I think he's a good guy to try to sell right now, but make sure you don't undersell, because I think the key here is, even if he doesn't come anywhere close to his production of the past 2 weeks, the rest of the season, and he becomes an RB3, you've already won with what you've gotten on the return for what you paid to get him. Whether you drafted Dowdle, whether you picked him up off the wire more recently, he's already delivered much more than you could have expected. So that's a W. Now, if you can trade him to upgrade another position or get a more stable running back, that's another W. But holding Dowdle the rest of the way is not an L. So make sure that you treat it that way if you approach trying to sell Rico Dowdle this week.
Yep, agreed.
The Jets offense was full of L's last week in England against the Broncos. It really doesn't get much worse than what they put out there on the field. 82 total yards, minus 10 passing yards when you include the sack yardage. Garrett Wilson came away from that game with a hyperextended knee that's expected to cost him a couple of games. Fortunately for him, a couple of games would then run into the week 9 bye, so maybe they won't lose Wilson for anything beyond that. So Jared, we got to sort out what to do with this. I think the first question is, should we just dump Justin Fields in fantasy after what he put out there against Denver?
I mean, if you want your life to be more enjoyable, probably, yeah, because I just don't know how you're ever going to like feel good about starting this guy or know when to. I mean, just look at what Fields has done now. He obviously had the big week 1 against Pittsburgh, but he had the dud against Buffalo. That defense, hasn't been great. He had a decent game against Miami. That's a horrible defense. He had a decent fantasy game against Dallas, another horrible defense, but that almost all came in garbage time. Then he has the total dud against a tough Broncos defense. So, tough to blame him too much for that one. You can kind of see that one coming. But like his season in totality now looks, I think, a lot more worrisome than you might think based on the fantasy total. So, this matchup against Carolina's actually been pretty good against the run so far. They're 4th in those run defense power rankings, just 26th in pass defense, which you want the opposite for Fields, right? You want him in a better rushing matchup because that's how he's going to score most of his fantasy points, especially this week without Garrett Wilson. I don't know where the passing production is going to come from in this game from Fields, just the way he's been playing without Garrett Wilson. So you're really banking on the rushing. We did have Carolina play Kyler Murray early on in the season. Murray had 32 rushing yards in that game, so it's kind of like right around his average. So again, I think, Fields could do it with the rushing, but he's well outside our top 12 fantasy quarterbacks this week. And if you can, I think you leave him on your bench. If not, just outright drop him at this point.
I agree. And it sucks because this would have been a matchup looking at early in the season. You're like, all right, at least I know I can play Justin Fields that week. But right now we don't even know if the Jets are going to stick with Justin Fields. So we'll see what they do, but it's certainly much more palatable to not have him on your roster right now. And I'm not saying drop him for whatever, but if you're like, do I want Justin Fields or Jackson Dart? Sure seems like Jackson Dart right now.
Yeah, I agree. And like if you have a locked in starter at quarterback, I don't think there's a reason to hang on to Fields as a quarterback too. I do think you can start Breece Hall with confidence. He's dominating carries in that backfield since Braylon Allen went down. And I also think that Mason Taylor is startable this week. We've seen him have games already this season of like well above 20% target share. And he really, he's the favorite to lead this Jets team in targets this week. I know you might be talking, 24 passes for 150 total yards, but like if Mason Taylor gets 25-30% of that, that's still a pretty nice fantasy outing.
Now, if you have Breece Hall, you're starting him this week, but what if you don't have him? Does he make sense as a buy coming off of that brutal game against Denver?
I think so. I mean, to me, the usage and talent is what you're buying here, right? Like we know what the risk is, and it's that we've seen this Jets offense twice this year already, in that Buffalo game and in this Denver game, just have totally lower level games. Like you almost don't even think that's possible in an NFL game. So that's the risk. But even in that Broncos game, like Breece gave you a decent enough fantasy game just because of the rushing volume. He didn't see a target in that game, which I think is fluky, especially now with Garrett Wilson out. I think you're going to see Breece Hall's target volume pick back up. So I'd be willing to buy him. It doesn't come without risk because of the offensive environment, but I still think he's a really good player, and the usage has been there.
Yeah, and it should be as cheap as it's going to get coming off of that game in England, and with no rushing touchdowns for Hall so far. You're going to find Breece Hall treated in multiple spots on DraftSharks.com this week. He is one of the 3 running back buys in our Week 7 trade targets. Shane also treated him in his film review article that posts every Wednesday. And Jared, that's probably our best single addition to the site this year, I think, but not just because it's valuable stuff. Shane, with years of film evaluation behind him, looking into several players every single week, but it's also a lot different than what you're going to find on pretty much any other fantasy site.
Yeah, we've needed some of that, right? I think we nail the number side of this game, and that's what I'm comfortable with, but we needed someone like Shane to come in and sort of, supplement that with some of the film stuff, which definitely matters too, because, we always talk about this being a small sample size game. You only get 17 games out of these teams every year. So the film can definitely show you stuff that the numbers don't, and that's what Shane's good at.
Yep. So you'll find Hall in there. You'll find Vidal in there. You'll also find T. Higgins. So check that one out this week and every week. For now, let's wrap this up with a wide receiver who got us all excited just a couple weeks ago. Stefon Diggs, 6 catches for 101 against the Panthers, then 10 catches for 146 on 12 targets in that revenge game at Buffalo. And then, of course, right when we're all like, okay, Stefon Diggs is back. He's in my lineup every single week. And then he catches 3 passes for 28 yards on 3 targets against a New Orleans team that has no business limiting him. So did anything change, Jared, or is this just a reminder that wide receivers are volatile creatures?
Yeah, that's a lot of it. Diggs had a 50-yard catch in that game that was called back by a pretty iffy offensive pass interference call. Drake May only threw, I think it was 26 passes in that game. So that was part of the problem. The other problem here, though, is that Diggs still is not a full-time receiver. He got to an 82% route rate in week 4. And at that point, I was kind of like, okay, they were just easing him in coming off the knee injury, and he's going to be this full-time player going forward. But the 2 weeks since, he's gone 64% of the routes in that Bills game and then 71% of the routes against the Saints last week. So that's definitely a limiting factor. He has drawn targets at a high rate this season. He's been targeted on 26% of his routes. That's the 12th best mark among all wide receivers. And I would expect that to continue because I do think when he's on the field, he's clearly this team's best wide receiver. So Diggs definitely still startable. I'm kind of treating him as like a fringy wide receiver 2/3, not like the higher end wide receiver 2 that we had him ranked as last week. And I thought he might have been able to, have that type of production the rest of the way. But if his playing time is going to be limited like this, I do think it kind of knocks him down a few tiers.
Yeah, the production made it look like, all right, we now that we've got some games between him and last year's ACL tear, he's ramping up. Not really ramping up so far, like you just pointed out. The playing time remains a little bit limited versus what you typically see from higher end wide receivers. Obviously, they don't want to put him out on the field to do more than catch passes, and that's reflected in that targets per route. So unexciting participation, but when he is out there, the ball is going his way much more often than not versus other wide receivers. So, you just have to know the volatility that comes with that. As long as you place Stefon Diggs in that, mid to low wide receiver 2 range, I would say, even when you factor in, floor, ceiling, how much we're likely expecting the Patriots to pass in a given week, he remains solid. We just need to make sure we don't get too excited by the big weeks.
Yeah, this is a pass-heavy offense, I'd say, in terms of both neutral pass rate and pass rate over expected. Drake May's playing like a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, by pretty much any metric you look at. So all that stuff's good news for Diggs. I still like him going forward. I just think, again, the ceiling is kind of capped if he's not going to be a full-time player. And even that could change, right? Again, we saw him get to an 82% route rate in week 4. And these things could shift as we work throughout the season. So it's definitely still in on Steph Diggs.
And by the way, those targets per route have increased over the past few weeks. He ranks 4th among wide receivers, according to the fantasy points data, in targets per route over the past 3 weeks, after ranking 63rd in that category over the first 3 weeks of the season. So there is, there are indications that he's trending upward, as you would expect from a guy who did, just have last season ended early by an ACL tear. You can see how we project Stefon Diggs and all these other players for week 7 on draftsharks.com right now. Plus, you'll find Jody's start sit report. You'll find Shane's film review article. You'll find Jared's matchups and usage articles. You'll find my latest trade targets. You'll find dynasty updates from Kevin and Shane, and you'll find all the tools that you need to help manage and enhance your roster, because Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.